Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the dark. They smile, they talk softly, they blend into everyday life, and we never see the danger until it's too late. Samuel Little was one of those men. For decades, he drifted from town to town, killing with his bare hands, and no one even knew his name. The FBI calls him the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. 93 confessed murders, 93 women who vanished, and for nearly half a century, nobody connected the dots. This is the story of how one of the most ordinary-looking men in America became one of the deadliest in human history. Samuel Little was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia. His mother, he claimed, was a sex worker who abandoned him early in life. He grew up in Ohio, raised mostly by his grandmother, strict, religious, but unable to control his growing darkness. From a young age, Little showed signs of violence and obsession. He was fascinated by women's necks, their vulnerability, their shape. In interviews decades later, he would describe that fascination with eerie calmness, saying, "I was drawn to their necks. It's hard to explain. I just like to touch them." At school, he was quiet but unpredictable. By his teenage years, he'd already been arrested for theft, burglary, and assault. It was the start of a life spent in and out of jail, but prison didn't change him. It taught him how to hide better. During the 1960s and 70s, Samuel Little became a true drifter, a man without roots, always on the road. He worked as a day laborer, a cemetery worker, even a traveling boxer. He lived in his car, slept under bridges, and moved constantly, from Ohio to Florida, from Mississippi to California. His name never stayed long in one police file. He targeted women who lived on the edge of society, sex workers, runaways, addicts, women of color often ignored by the system. And that, investigators later said, was his advantage. He once told detectives, "I never picked women that someone would come looking for." Those words haunt every agent who worked the case, because he was right. Back then, there were no national databases, no shared crime reports between states. Each murder was a local tragedy and a national blind spot. Every time police got close, he disappeared, crossing a state line like a ghost. Between the early 1970s and 2005, Samuel Little claimed to have killed in 19 different states. He strangled his victims, often in secluded areas, alleys, abandoned lots, rural roads. He never used weapons. No fingerprints, no gun, no knife. Only his strength and silence. And that made him nearly invisible to investigators. Forensic technology was limited. DNA databases didn't exist. A body found in one state had no link to an arrest in another. So each case stayed unsolved, labeled as undetermined cause or accidental overdose. Years passed. Dozens of families searched for answers that never came. And all the while, Samuel Little kept moving, kept killing. He told agents later that he enjoyed the moment when they stopped breathing. He described it not with rage, but with nostalgia, as if recalling an old memory he treasured. That chilling calmness became his signature. It wasn't detective genius that caught him. It was luck. In September 2012, Los Angeles police arrested the 72-year-old Samuel Little in a homeless shelter on a minor drug charge. He was frail, soft-spoken, and looked more like a retired grandfather than a killer. But when they ran his DNA through the system, it matched 3 unsolved murders from the 1980s, 3 women strangled in Los Angeles. Detectives were stunned. They brought him in for questioning. And as they showed him photos of the victims, he smiled. "That's mine," he said. "I remember her." They thought he was bragging, but soon they realized he wasn't lying. In 2018, Texas Ranger James Holland, one of the FBI's most skilled interrogators, began meeting with Little in prison. He didn't threaten him. He didn't push. He just listened. And slowly, Samuel Little began to talk. At first, he admitted to a few killings, then a few more, then dozens. By the end, he claimed 93. Holland later said, he remembered every detail: the color of their clothes, the car he drove, the weather that night. He remembered the smell of the air, but the most shocking part wasn't just the number. It was the accuracy. Every time investigators checked, his memory matched old, unsolved cases, dates, locations, descriptions. It was like unlocking a time capsule of death. Little even began drawing his victims, dozens of portraits painted from memory. Each one a haunting face of a woman, painted in bright colors, with piercing eyes. They looked alive, and that's what made them terrifying. The FBI released these sketches to the public, hoping someone might recognize the faces. Many did. Families came forward, old missing person files were reopened, and name by name, the forgotten women began to return to history. Experts tried to understand what made Samuel Little tick. He wasn't insane. He wasn't driven by trauma or revenge. He was driven by something colder: pleasure. He described his killings as beautiful moments. He called himself an artist. He enjoyed drawing the same women he murdered, as if creating eternal trophies of his crimes. Psychologists labeled him a power control serial killer. He killed not out of anger, but because it made him feel in control. One agent said, he saw himself as God, deciding who lived and who didn't. And for nearly 40 years, no one stopped him. Samuel Little's victims were scattered across America. Most were women of color. Many lived on the streets. Their deaths rarely made the news. That's why his crimes stayed hidden so long, because the world didn't look for those women. In one confession, Little said, "I knew no one would care. That's why I picked them." That line became the darkest truth of all. His success wasn't just his cunning, it was society's indifference. He targeted the invisible, and that's how he became invisible himself. By 2019, after hundreds of hours of interviews and cross-state investigations, the FBI confirmed over 60 murders directly linked to Samuel Little's confessions. The rest were still being investigated. They created an interactive map showing every location he mentioned, pins scattered across the entire United States, from California to Louisiana, from Illinois to Florida. Each dot represented a life, a name, a story. And as agents filled in the blanks, they realized how massive his crimes truly were. One FBI analyst said, "It's not just the number, it's how long he got away with it. He killed for 40 years, and no one even noticed the pattern." That realization shook American law enforcement to its core. In prison, Samuel Little lived out his final days as a strange celebrity. True crime authors wrote to him. Reporters requested interviews. He talked openly, even cheerfully, about his murders. He called his victims "my babies." He said he never raped or tortured them, as if that somehow made him less evil. He was proud of his memory. He once bragged, "You can show me a face from 40 years ago, and I can tell you where she's buried." In December 2020, Samuel Little died in prison at age 80. He never expressed guilt, never said sorry, not once. To his final breath, he believed he'd beaten the system, and in a way, he almost had. The Samuel Little case forced the FBI and local police departments to re-examine how they handle missing person and unsolved cases, especially involving marginalized victims. It exposed the cracks in the justice system, the failures of communication between states, and the painful truth that some lives are simply not prioritized enough. But out of that darkness came something important. Because of his confessions, dozens of families finally found closure. They finally had answers, names, dates, places, truth. Little's paintings, once a killer's twisted trophies, became tools for justice. Each face he painted helped investigators identify another victim. Even today, years after his death, the FBI continues to receive tips about the women in those sketches. Each new name brings peace to a family who has waited decades. Samuel Little wanted to be remembered. He wanted the world to know what he did, to leave behind a legacy of terror. But in the end, his victims are the ones who deserve remembrance. Their lives, their stories, their humanity. They were daughters, mothers, friends, and for too long, they were forgotten. The world sees him as the face of evil. But maybe the real story isn't about how he lived, it's about how we failed to see what was right in front of us. Because Samuel Little didn't hide in the shadows. He walked among us, and we never looked twice. Fade to black. Display text. If you recognize any of the faces drawn by Samuel Little, contact the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. End.